Hi, welcome to Haven. This is a podcast that is a safe space for curiosity and conversation. I'm your host, Haven, and today I'm curious of what does healthy masculinity even look like? I'm actually going to pause here and ask something of you as a listener. So wherever you're listening to this, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, watching on YouTube, would you actually pause it and go subscribe so you can be a continued listener? Or maybe you're already subscribed, but you haven't rated it or reviewed. Will you please do so? I'm trying to grow this, and the way to do that is through you and through engagement. And typically I'll have this kind of call to action at the end of the episode, but if you're anything like me, the second the content's done, I'm just switching over to the next thing. So I want to put it here in the middle. I'm going to humbly ask, will you please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening to this? Thanks. What does healthy masculinity even look like? And I almost titled this, what does it look like in 2024? Because I think it changes. I think what looks like healthy masculinity this year is going to be different in 10 years than it was 10 years previously. But my producer said that's not an evergreen title, so I've changed it from the top. But the point there is, what is it in this moment in time? And what is the evergreen concept of masculinity? What is just cultural and times? And we currently define that. So I want to break into it in detail, because when I think about this topic, obviously toxic masculinity had a huge time of this is wrong. We don't want abuse of power. We don't want unhealthy domination. And then it went to the other end of the spectrum where it felt like it's a docile, over-domesticated, decaffeinated version of masculinity. And I think the pendulum is now trying to come a little bit in the middle ground, but I want to put this out there too, of when I say masculinity, I really do mean just how do we even define it? And I come this with humble intentions. I'm not trying to put anyone into a box of anything on that front. I think I have a ton of masculine and feminine traits inside. I think we all do. But how do we even define that? I asked one of my friends who identifies as non-binary, and they were like, well, I think I have both masculine and feminine traits. And I was like, okay, what are the masculine traits? And so I think even whether your gender identity is on any part of the spectrum, I do think there is need to say, okay, well, what are the feminine aspects that we're seeing in ourselves? What are the masculine ones? But if we stay in this camp, I really want to say, what does healthy masculinity look like? This came up for me because I have a 2-year-old son, and he is very stereotypical masculine. He has he's kind of got aggression, and he has a low growl, and my friends joke about his low voice and how he just wants to smash things. Like one time we were watching my daughter's gymnastics, and he was hitting the glass, and I was like, hey, let's use gentle hands on the glass. And I was like, we don't really want to break it. And he goes, I want to break it. And this dad next to me just laughed so hard. He was like, yeah, man, I feel you. I really do. And other men have come up to me about my son, like these kind of alpha male types, and they're like, yeah, he's got it. Like, he's it. And I was like, is there a secret club? Like, what is this with these, super testosterone men seeing it in a little boy? But I'm like, okay, if I'm his mother and I want to champion and celebrate who he is, how can I nurture this? And I celebrate his masculinity and make sure that it's at the utmost highest good and the healthiest version of it. I don't want to squash it. I don't want to suppress it. I do want to channel it. So for that reason, I want to bring in a guest. Have you guys seen the Barbie movie? Most of us have. It's a very popular, obviously, route. There is stereotypical Barbie, where it's the one that you think of when you think of Barbie. There's so many different variations, a myriad of different expressions of Barbie, but there is one stereotypical Barbie. I was like, who is the stereotypical Barbie of masculinity? What I thought of was my uncle. So welcome, Uncle Justice Coleman.
Yes, my niece.
Ooh.
I just think I'm the biggest support of this podcast you've ever had. Mm-hmm. And yet here I am with no merch. Not even a tote.
Yeah.
I feel like today, as a thank you, I should at least get one of those sweet crew necks. You still have those in stock? Because
That's true. Havenpod.com. It's a valid point. You have been an OG supporter because in my first season,
how do you sit on this couch?
I know it's a deep one.
Can I talk about masculinity and sit like this?
I think you can.
Okay, thank you.
But you let me use your podcast studio. You have an uncomplicated podcast,
Yep.
the name of it. And when I was about to start this, I was like, what's your setup? And you're like, just come use mine. And you were so gracious. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Let me get a tote.
I will. Okay. You won't. I will. I promise you will leave with a tote. I have them in my closet. I'll have them. But I'm so glad you're here today.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be invited because I love all your content, man. You're just doing a great job helping people navigate some of the challenges. So love it.
Thank you. So stereotypical Barbie of masculinity.
I saw the movie, loved it.
Okay.
My wife literally got up, walked out to go to the bathroom during the monologue.
No.
And she comes back. I'm like, you just missed the best part. She's like, what are you talking about? I was like, I can't explain.
Right. No.
You got to see it.
You have to see it. It was written so well where that could be an entire episode on itself. It's just the woman to woman understanding of what that monologue was, how great it was. I want everyone to hear it, to be like, even if you can't identify with it, of being like, wow, it must be so difficult to be a woman.
I was reading these like people saying that in the movie, guys were like standing up in the movie theater. Did you read this?
No.
And they're like talking to the audience, like, you're doing such a great job. Like,
Oh
or
my
like,
gosh.
wait, you know what I mean? Like guys, like stop talking.
Yeah,
like, have you learned nothing?
You're still missing the point. You're still missing it. But I mean,
But I felt that way when I saw it. I was
Uh-huh.
just like, man, what a concise way to, identify these challenges. It was awesome.
Yeah, I like the initiation of like men standing up and clapping. You're a little off the mark, but I like that. But I'm glad you're here today because when I think of like, okay, masculinity, what comes to mind is like big, gruff, like you are a black belt, you do like jiu-jitsu competitions that you win.
What do you mean? I do.
I've been to one class
You
with
went
you.
with me and did phenomenal.
That was very fun.
Which, by the way, you know what you said the other day? You said that you feel like you are masculine.
Mm-hmm.
And I have never, I mean, I don't want to get too much into this conversation too fast with defining it. But I have never really, that's never crossed my mind.
Okay.
That's never crossed my mind.
I think I have masculine traits and feminine traits, but I would say that sometimes I lean into masculine traits. So I guess we can get into it. What do you mean by that? Like, when I think of like masculinity, I think of what first comes to mind is potentially like dominance. And I think sometimes I do like step into that trait where I think femininity is often like a softness and a relaxation. And so that's what I mean by that. Like, would you say that still, no, you don't understand that?
I think when you call me and your picture comes up on my phone and it's this beautiful picture of you,
Mm-hmm.
masculinity, I'm just thinking, wow, what a beautiful, and I mean, there's so much nuance to this, but I remember one time you were leading a conference. You were in charge of this conference down in LA with like thousands of people. And you oversaw that thing from top to bottom. There's hundreds of thousands of dollars involved. There's people flying in from everywhere. And you had this headset on and you were just such an awesome leader.
Mm-hmm.
And you had told me, you're like, yeah, I'm trying not to be too bossy because that can come off. And I'm like, oh, wow, what an extra challenge you have to deal with, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you did such a great job as a leader. And I wonder if sometimes, give me your thoughts on this, people see what has been historically, male leadership and been like, that's what masculine is. And so maybe it's, I wonder if those are two separate things, leadership and masculinity, because obviously you can be a leader as a female or as a male. So I wonder if sometimes leadership characteristics, we go, oh, that's in the masculine category because you're an awesome leader.
Well, I love that you're calling this out because even as you're listening, I'm like, well, maybe like I just have so much confusion. So when I put it even on Instagram, a Q&A of like, what does healthy masculinity look like? And the responses that came up, I'm going to read some of them off. Vulnerability, kindness, confidence, but not cockiness. Someone said being comfortable asking for forgiveness.
That's good.
Communicating what they're feeling truthfully yet calmly.
That's awesome.
Powerful but not malignant. Knowing that dominance does not equate to masculinity. Willing to show tenderness. But to me, a lot of those responses are either just a healthy human or like equating of what someone wants in a man. But I think categorically, when you think of masculinity, it's strength, dominance, providing, but so many of the answers are like that softened. When I think of, okay, if I were to pull what does healthy femininity look like, I don't think it would be like the other end tamed version of femininity. Does that make sense? I feel like that's where it's getting confusing, is what's just a healthy person and what are healthy masculine traits or feminine traits? Or is it just now we all have so much within us that like, that's just leadership? That's my overall question that I want to kind of parse through, because I do think, like I see again in my son, like I see these categorically masculine.
Your son is going to be a monster truck driver.
Yeah.
The other day, he was kind of in a little bit of a bad mood, and he was holding on to your dad. And I'm like, let's talk about monster trucks. I was like, if I get a monster truck, would you want to get in one and climb it and drive? And he's like, he got all excited. I'm like, could we like go through the mud? And he's like, yeah. Like he just totally, something in him was like, that's what I want to do, you know? And I love that about that. And you mentioned how other dads see that. Other dads definitely do see that. They go, I do want to break that glass. You know?
I do want to break that glass.
There's this page on Instagram of like guys throwing giant rocks down hills, and they just roll down the hills and knock things over. And it's like just a page for guys, because it's so embarrassing. But so something's there. I don't know.
That's what I'm saying, is like the testosterone, like biochemically, like that in him, the fact that they're action movies, I could not give a rip about action movies. Like at all. And I'm not saying women don't like action movies. I would just say that like, it's primarily like men going to those. So what is that in it where it is like the gruff, like monster trucks, I want to smash, like the aggression, where in an unhealthy state, it's toxic masculinity. What is a healthy state? What is a healthy man tapping into that?
Could it be depend on what your kind of role is? You know, because, you know, I've written 2 books on masculinity, and both of them are kind of like how to be a father, how to be a husband. I think kind of like your assignment also has to do with how that kind of plays out.
Tell me more.
Well, I mean, I may ask you this: act like a man. Good saying or bad saying? Act like a man.
It depends on who's saying it. Like if they're saying it to a
ding,
man,
ding, ding, ding.
to a little boy who's like crying, I'd be like, no way, men can cry. But if it's like someone caring and saying like, hey, this is your moment, call to action, stand up and be brave and have a moment of courage, I would applaud it. Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, like based on my experience, I've never met a guy who has a problem with that saying. Like it's actually like a reminder and an encouragement to kind of like, come on, man, like step up and be who you know you are, you know, you know, that's my experience. So like my son, he's 14, and you know, we're really like looking at what's the difference between being a boy and being a man. And that term act like a man is not don't act like a woman. It means it's time to grow up and act like a man, not like a boy. Right. So like in the Bible, King David, right? He the last thing he said to Solomon before he gave him the throne was be strong, act like a man, do what the Lord has required. And what he's saying is it's going to take strength to lead, but you're also going to have to mature. You have to be responsible. So a lot of like boyhood to manhood journey or rite of passage in different cultures around the world, which is fascinating to study, has so much to do with like, I'm going to take responsibility for myself. You know, like when you're a boy, your mom kind of takes responsibilty for you. But as you get older, you're like, I'm going to take responsibility for myself. And, you know, I hope my oldest son, he got in trouble because, you know, he's in the background, his little sister, they're making fun of his little sister. And he basically said something that kind of chimed in about her liking a boy or something. You know, he's like teasing, like, yeah, she does like boys or something, like not, you know, pretty harmless or whatever. But, you know, I called him aside later because we're in this conversation about, you know, a vision for manhood for him, you know? And I said, you know, hey, do you want to be the kind of older brother that when your little sister gets made fun of, that you kind of chime in about her liking boys? Or do you want to be the kind of older brother who takes responsibility in the family and this one job that you get to do that nobody else gets to do as the older brother? And you can say, hey, no, my sister doesn't like, she's not boy crazy. Don't talk about my sister. You know, who do you want to be? And I saw when I corrected him like that, I saw like his shoulders go back, Haven. Like he just had this vision of like, oh, no. I want to be the guy who takes responsibility for my little sister. I want to like run interference and be like, don't talk about my sister that way. And it was kind of like just this call to like be a man, you know? And that I think it's like the protector thing you said. It's like, hey, like if you're a man, you have this unique opportunity as a big brother to kind of, and a big sister could do that. But when I kind of gave him that vision, he was like, yeah, you got it, Dad. Boom, I'm going to be that, and I've seen him be that, like, I'm going to stand up for somebody who can't stand up for themselves. Like that's really probably the epitome of like manhood is like that person can't stand up for themselves. So I'm going to sacrifice myself to do that. Like, does that make sense? I don't know.
It does. You unlocked something for me. I've never thought of act like a man saying like, don't act like a boy. I thought it was like, act like a man and not feminine. But I think you're right. It's actually a maturity of like, don't act like a little boy, where I think even like toxic masculinity is more like toxic boyhood. Yeah. Like it's really just insecure.
Ding, ding, ding. It's 100% accurate. And when I ask people about, what do you think about that term, act like a man? That's what I was saying. A lot of my friends who are gals think, oh, you're comparing men to women. But no. When a guy hears that, he's thinking about being a boy and then growing up. So it's a different paradigm for guys when they hear that term.
Well, I want to hear your take on this too, of like, when you think of, like, for me, I think masculinity is super attractive. Like, I think like a man who's in his manhood.
Beards. Do you like beards?
No, Aaron doesn't have a beard, and I'm cool with that. Well,
you could be a beard girl. You don't know.
Maybe when we're 40, Aaron can tell me if I'm a beard girl. That's a weird way to say that. So when I was thinking, I was like, okay, who in like the world right now would I think of like, categorically masculine? And I think of like Travis Kelce with Taylor Swift.
Well,
like,
you're always sending me Andrew Tate clips.
Oh my God.
So I'm like, is this really your definition? Because I feel like this is unhealthy.
You're about to get me canceled. I don't. I'm saying that as like he's making a joke.
And I will keep making these jokes.
I know you're going to derail me.
Yes.
Travis Kelce to me is like, he's like, Taylor Swift is super tall. Like he's taller. He's bigger. He is not threatened by her having an amazing career. He celebrates and champions it. But then also at the Super Bowl, he got so upset. He was yelling at his coach, like that kind of like untamed masculinity. What do you think as far as like, what is like a stereotypical outside of yourself? Like, who do you think of when you think of, oh, that one's someone that I identify as like, they're really leaning heavy and masculine, but I think it's in a healthy sense.
It's so funny that you said that to me one time. We were on a walk and you said like, you're the most masculine guy I know. I was like, I've never thought that, like I don't put myself in some sort of category as overtly masculine, but I think that kind of comes back to the leadership thing. Like, I think I see leadership as like, awesome. This is a guy who's willing to lay down his life for his family as a husband, or, make a sacrifice as a father, So, I mean, when Will Smith gets up on the award show and he backhands Chris Rock, every guy is not thinking, is it okay to backhand another man? Every guy's just going, Will Smith, you're 100 pounds heavier than this dude. Why are you hitting the little guy? Everybody else made it this big thing about like violence, and everyone's just like, that guy is literally half your size. Why would you do that? So I don't know. What did you think about that?
I thought it was dumb, and he let his emotions rule him.
Was there any part of you, if I'm interviewing you now, by the way,
this is what I'm talking about. Masculinity is your aggression of taking over. I'm saying of like taking over the podcast.
It's uncle energy.
No, it's, to me, that is a masculine. I'm going to come here and run this podcast.
I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm sorry.
Hit me with a question.
I'll put it in check. I was just, I'm fascinated by that answer. I launched our podcast off of that moment when I saw
my answer, thinking he was dumb because he was ruled by emotions.
No. Oh. Just, I think you're right. But I think most people say that. But, so some gals out there who are like, I like that he stood up for, his wife or whatever. So.
I think there's a time and a place. Like if someone, like if he was physically being taunted and he had to stand up and defend himself, like I think that's totally fine. I don't think it was like, I thought it was words that turned into physical violence.
Can we talk about your grandmother for a second?
Your mother?
My mother? Your grandmother? Can we talk about her for a second?
Absolutely.
Can we just give a little backstory if you don't mind? This is my podcast again. Sorry. I'm sorry. I record so many podcasts. I'm so used to it.
Whatever. What's your question? We're going to go with it. And I'm going to let you lead this one.
Would you put your grandmother, my mother, would you put her more toward masculine energy or feminine energy?
Okay. I would put her strongly masculine. So when you're like, oh, when your phone and your picture pops up in this beautiful woman, how could that be masculine? I was like, grandmother is one of the most striking women I know. Yeah. And she is so intense and aggressive and not very soft and not very like typically feminine. She's
Yeah.
so masculine. So we grew up with a matriarchy.
But I never thought of my mom as masculine. I just thought of her as just a leader and just, not a pushover.
Yeah, I think though, this is where I think we can kind of dive into this is I would say that sometimes women have to tap into their masculine traits and overcompensate when either their partners or their fathers or the men in their lives are not. And I think that's sometimes even an over response of that's what I saw is women over responding. Maybe, I don't know if it was their nature. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't because their partners or the men in their lives weren't.
Can I share a private story about my mom?
Okay.
Okay. So you might have to edit this out. I don't know. But to this day, my mom will bring this up, Haven. She'll go, the nicest thing anyone's ever done for me? Do you know the story when she says this?
No.
Okay. So she'll just randomly we'll be driving and she'll go, the nicest thing any man's ever done for me? Like any man's ever done for me.
Okay.
And this was a long time ago. I'm 40, by the way. I have matured since then. Okay. I was 19. May have had a lip ring. I'm not sure.
I
so
forgot.
Long time ago.
Huge hair.
Yeah. Old English tattoos. Yeah.
Yes.
Driving a Honda Civic. Okay. Fast and the Furious era. All right. This is so embarrassing.
Okay.
And we were in a sketchy part of town. And I cut some guy off, as was the usual. And this guy behind me, who's a construction worker, he leans out the window. I can't believe I'm telling the story. He goes, yells at me or whatever. And I think I flipped him off or something. Mm-hmm. And he goes, "Hey, is that your mother in the car?" And I'm just like, and there's not a dude who's watching this podcast who the moment you talk about their mom, whatever you call it, something rises up,
sure.
Right? Something rises up. We'll call it masculine energy. And he goes, "Is that your mother in the car?" And I just I remember being like, whatever he says next. And he goes, "F your mother." You haven't heard this story?
Never. I've never heard the story.
What do you think I should do as a 19-year-old man and some guy is cussing out my mom to her face? What do you think I should do?
What do you I mean, my take is that guy is probably dangerous. He sounds psycho. If a little car move is tripping him off, you should just mitigate the solution and leave. But I don't know.
100% accurate. That's exactly what I tell my son when he's in that situation. The other day, my son, because some kids were picking on him in the mall with his group of friends. And I was like, dude, those guys probably have a weapon. Like, stay away from those guys. That's why they're so confident. So I probably should have. But at 19, you don't really have a fully developed prefrontal cortex.
No.
You're just.
Especially not you back then.
I was living on my own, dude. When I was 18, dude, I woke up on my 18th birthday. My dad had apartment ads laid out across my bed. I've been living on my own for probably a year. I think maybe I was probably, like you said, overcompensating, insecure. But he said, "F your mother, dude."
Yeah.
What was I supposed to do?
Well, what did you do?
What do you think I did?
Did you go out and fight him?
I socked that fool right in the face.
No.
I thought I knocked him out, but he had a weapon. So we get in the car, we take off. I thought I knocked him out. Well, I asked him to apologize and he didn't. So there's that.
You gave him a chance.
I did. I said, "Don't you talk to my mom like that. You apologize to my mom right now." And he didn't. So anyways, so my hand's all bloody and we get in the car and we take off and my mom is like, "That is the nicest thing any man has ever done for me."
No.
I'm not kidding. Like she was so when I was talking about the whole Jada Pinkett Smith,
yes.
the whole in her generation, she's like, "Thank you for standing up for me." And I was reminded of that story because you had said there's, some women, might be dominant because they don't have a partner maybe who's standing up for them. So they're standing up because nobody's standing up for them. So we get to the house, the story gets worse. We get to the house, the dude starts following us. He's following us. No. So I think it's over. I'm like, "Yeah, Mom, don't worry. I put that guy in his place." I'm just feeling like Mr. Big Dog, right?
Sure.
And we pull up to the driveway. Homeboy pulls up behind us. He's followed us home.
He knows where you live.
Now he knows where we live. You've never heard this story?
No.
So my mom gets out of the car. I'm not kidding. And yells, "Get out of the car. Fight my son like a real man." I am not kidding. Haven, this is not a small man. This is a giant man. He's a construction worker. Right? He has a taser in his hand.
Get out of the car.
My mom
son.
is putting us together. It's time. I'm like,
As a
Mom,
parent, I'm like, this is absurd.
this is your grandmother we're talking about. This is your lineage.
Hey, it does not surprise me. I named my daughter after this woman.
Yes. And so I'm like, all right, Mom, well, this might be a little much, And then after my mom was so confident, he got scared. I'm like, oh, thank God.
Yeah.
Right. Because he has a taser. It's like with like the thing. And he takes off. And then my mom looks at me, true story. And I don't think she cares that I share the story. She goes, let's follow him. This is true. And I'm like, yeah, Mom, let's now begin to chase him for chasing us. And so we're following him. You know where he's going? He's going to the police station. You know why? Because his face is he's missing a tooth or something. It's all jacked up because I punched him. No. And he's got my address for assault and battery, right? So gets worse. We get to my mom calls, and by my mom, I mean your grandmother.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. She calls my dad, and my dad meets us at the police station. And what do you think my dad does?
At this point, I don't know,
What do you
guys.
think my dad does? Your grandfather. What does he do?
Shirley says, let's go home. What does he do?
I'm not kidding. My dad has found out that this dude followed us to my house and has his address. My dad comes walking down the sidewalk with a sledgehammer in his hands. This is a true story. To the police station. And I'm like, Dad, it's fine. I'll handle it. This is how I grew up.
That is wild.
And I don't know if I should tell that story, but the cops, the guy was making a scene. The cops basically didn't, my hand was bleeding and his face was messed up. But they go, honestly, it was awesome that you stood up for your mother. And that guy is such an a-hole that we're not going to do anything. And they just let me go.
What?
Yeah. They liked that I stood up for my mom and but this is 20 years ago. But,
that's true. Different era.
Yeah. So
that's
Devonshire Police Department.
I've never heard that story.
Yeah, we shouldn't share that story. It's an awful story. What's the moral of the story? Why would I ever share that story?
How are you going to land that plane,
Other than
man?
to let your viewers know that, this is how you grew up, was seeing you had a grandmother. What's it called? A matriarchy? Would you call it a matriarchy?
Yes. I mean, it was like not only on my grandmother's side, on my dad's side, like his mom was like so full for the one who was leading the charge. Absolutely. In an amazing way. I respect that woman. So, okay. With this story, if Logan was in his Honda Civic in 5 years and Maria was in the front seat and that scenario happened, well, what would you say to him?
I would 100% say ignore that. Of course, ignore that. Yeah.
Okay.
Because Maria doesn't need that. You know what I mean? There's got to be a better way than violence. You know what I mean? You got to avoid that as much as possible. Okay.
I think that's also a key piece of Maria doesn't need that because she feels protected. I don't know if grandmother ever felt protected. So someone,
why do you say that? What do you mean?
Let me finish.
Don't you talk about my dad?
I mean, I think grandmother, even though you overstepped, I think sometimes as a woman, you're like, wow, someone's standing up for me. That feels great. And it felt like a relief and a relaxing where Maria,
that's my point.
You would stand up for her. And so I don't think she needs that. So I do think sometimes it's femininity does crave that of gosh, can just someone be bigger and can someone step in and don't push me down to make yourself bigger, just be bigger.
Yeah, that's such a great way to put it. Yeah, Maria wouldn't want Logan to do that and be in harm's way. She doesn't need that. But if you text my mom right now, what's the nicest thing a man's ever done for you? Text her and see what she says. She will tell you about this story. Embarrassing.
I'm going to do this live and we'll do this callback.
Yeah.
Text GFAB. What is the nicest thing that a man has ever done for you? ?
Okay. I want to pause on the episode and read back out what my grandmother had written back because I know we initially texted her and said we'd call back to it. So I said, what is the nicest thing a man has ever done for you? And she first wrote back, loyalty, allegiance, trust, truth tellers, not one thing. There was this one thing. I was in a car with Justice when he was a teenager. A man called me a name, and he got out of the car and punched him. Meant a lot for him to defend me. So Justice totally called it. That was the nicest thing that a man has ever done for her.
So Logan the other day was at school, and somebody was making fun of his friend. And Logan, he's not a some sort of overly confident kid. You know, he didn't get your genes or my genes. Takes one to know one.
He's not starting a podcast.
He's actually secure. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's not insecure. He's not got something to prove.
Speak for yourself, my man.
Yeah. I was talking about myself. So he's secure in his manhood, whatever. He's not, but somebody, he's never been in a fight in his life. Never even been close to one.
He is the best 14-year-old I've ever met.
Yes. Which we don't want to jinx it. This could be as good as it gets. You know what I mean? People always like, talk more about parenting. I'm like, I don't know. Like, this could be the peak. You know, I want to wait and see how it goes. So Logan's at school and somebody makes fun of his friend. And this is so wild that they start throwing food at his friend at a lunch, like a full blown, like this is like high school, you know, cafeteria situation. And they're throwing food at his friend and making fun of him. And people are like pointing and laughing at his little friend. And this bully is saying things in front of everybody and just making this kid feel super small. What do you think Logan does?
Does he stand up for his friend?
What would you want him to do?
Stand up for his friend?
How should he stand up?
Don't do that to my friend. That's not cool.
Or what?
I wouldn't say or what. I would just say the statement.
But don't you kind of feel like when you stand up for your friend, you are kind of saying that? Like, aren't you kind of saying like, I'm drawing a line, don't cross it?
I think if you give a threat, it makes you seem weaker. I think just you call out what you don't want. That's how I would handle it.
I think in man language, a guy who stands up and says that to another man, I think intuitively it's almost like don't cross the line again. Or, you know, I think it's a test.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a
well,
chest
you know
to
what's
chest.
interesting? You say that of like, again, going into like, there's so much that comes out of here of healthy masculinity of like, okay, if there's going to be that aggression, I want healthy males to stand up and face that aggression. And I do think in internal, I have a friend who has a son and she said, I realized early on, because we were at breakfast one time and he was like acting out. She came next to him, his head's here, her head's here. And she just talked into his ear firmly and quietly. And I said, why'd you do that? And she goes, I found if I go eye to eye for him, he feels threatened and gets more aggressive.
Wow.
And she goes, so she said, so I found that if I don't look him in the eye and I talk to his side, he's more receptive. I think that's something in a male of if you lock eyes with me, like evolutionarily, like we're going to go toe to toe. So I would say, I think you're right of like the men hearing it that way is I do think men perceive those kind of things as conflict, threat, aggression, like down to their core.
That's wise though, what you just said about that's pretty cool.
Isn't she? Yeah, she was brilliant. And it was just at breakfast. I literally asked, I said, why did you do that? And she was like, I just have noticed. And she has an older daughter. She was like, obviously I don't have to do that. Like she doesn't feel the same way. She goes, but I can tell when I'm trying to correct my son, if I look at him, it's not received well. She's like, so I meet him on his level.
How does Echo respond when you correct him?
Oh, you have to hit him over the head metaphorically for him to, because he just so strong and stubborn. Like Isley will be like, oh, okay, mom. He'll be like, I don't want to, or like, I'm going to, or like it is like a challenge. He will come up and just be so like, I'm not gonna do that. And it's almost just because you said not, he just sees it as like, oh, well, I'm going to dig my heels in.
I love that God has given Echo a mom and a dad to nurture. You know, I mean, that team is going to help him because he has such a great dad. So
such a great dad. Well, that's another thing. Okay. The stereotypical Barbie, like I think Aaron is a different expression, but I would still say he is very masculine. Although he has a lot of like what I would say is like femininity of like he's way more romantic and like he's way
how is like, that feminine? That's also masculine. Why can't you don't think the typical masculine dude who storms the castle and slays the dragon to rescue the damsel, that's not romantic?
Rom-coms aren't dragon slaying.
What lights a candle?
Rom-coms are written
with the flowers
for women where it's connecting and involved and emotional. And so I would say like that is more of a connecting expression of romance. Like I'm not saying a straight stereotypical cis man is not romantic. I'm saying that like in the grand scheme of things, I value romance less than Aaron values it. So I would say he's a different packaging of masculinity, but I would still say I value and am attracted to the masculinity in him, but I celebrate the feminine in him that he's using to express too. Just like I know that he is celebrating both in me. I feel like it fits in our partnership. I think everyone's different.
There's a simple test. This is the beard test. Okay, let's put a beard on that guy's face and let's see.
See, that to me is like, you're straight out of 1990 saying that.
My wife won't let me grow a beard. Okay? I'm sorry. It's coming out now on this podcast. She doesn't like it. So, but she loves masculine. She goes to all my jiu-jitsu tournaments.
Why are you
She goes wild in the jiu-jitsu tournaments. She yells things to people. She loves seeing it. So that's what's funny.
This is a greater question of what about a beard is masculine, because I think so much of that is cultural. You have short hair. Back in the day, men had super long hair. Then in the 50s, it was like trim your hair, you'll look like a girl. That's why I almost named this What is Healthy Masculinity in 2024, because it's different. Like your gender expression is different than these traits.
Yeah, I think masculinity is possibly defined by what other guys think, not what other girls think. Like what guys think is tough is like, oh, that's tough. Like I think guys maybe decide what's tough.
What?
Yeah, like I think maybe a guy basically to another guy helps define, yeah, that's awesome.
How so? Because to me, I think as a woman, I could see and identify masculinity.
Do you want to hear the end of the story about Logan in the cafeteria? Oh. We forgot that. Should we tell this thing? And you tell me.
This is the Justice takeover of this podcast.
I'm sorry.
I don't know if you've heard Aaron's takeover.
I'm sorry.
We'll do a new intro for Justice. No, please finish.
Did Aaron take it over too?
I set up the episode so he would. Yours is more of like an incognito kamikaze takeover. But yeah, please finish your story about Logan.
So he's at the cafeteria and they're picking on his friend. And I'm like, what? And he goes, Dad, I stood up and I told the other guy. He goes, I told him not to talk to my friend like that. And I'm like, way to go. Awesome. And I think like you, like that's the end of the story. He goes, but then he started walking toward me. I was like, what? No. He started walking towards you. And he goes, Dad, I did what you told me to do. I put my hands out like this. Now, Logan's a black belt. He trained for like 3.5 years to get that black belt, right? And he's been in sparring competitions and jiu-jitsu competitions. So he's okay with physical contact. But the moment some dude comes walking to you in front of all of your schoolmates, can you imagine the emotions he was probably feeling? He's so much more emotionally mature than I was at that age, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, if it was you probably would have found a stick or a brick, right?
I don't know. I'm not thinking of myself in this story.
I'm like, what'd you get for a weapon, Logan?
Hey, did Maria say go fight him? Was she sitting there egging you on? Oh no, that was just grandmother. This will be the nicest
thing you've ever done for me. You have a family name to uphold.
So he stands there like this.
No, not like this. Like this.
Like this.
Yeah, because like in law enforcement, put your hand out like that. This is like your personal space, and if somebody, like if for the police officer, like if you touch their hands like this, that's called the fence. So you've actually entered their space.
Got it.
So they have engaged.
I see.
Right. I'm not Mr. Wait till they throw their first punch. I think that's a bad idea. Right. Because
we've heard your story.
If you get punched in the face, which I've been punched in the face without like someone with not even seeing it coming, like they'll knock you out. That's super violent. Right. So he put his hands out like this and he goes, Dad, the moment he touched my fingers, I was ready to engage, you know? And I was just like, wow. And like, thank God the kid didn't do it because he would have gotten kicked out of school and it would have been awful. And, you know, but I was just like, you were ready to just actually stand up for your friend, like go all the way for your friend. And like, I don't know, as a dad, your listeners, you know, your viewers may disagree, but I was like, at the core of that, standing up for somebody who can't stand up for themselves, I think is very noble. How you do that probably looks different to different generations, like my mom or like Will Smith or whatever. But, you know, there's something in you that says, hey, if this guy's getting bullied, I think there's an injustice here that I want to stop, you know, or I want to get involved and say, hey, if no one's going to stand up for you, I'll stand up for you. And I think that's super noble.
And I think that's why healthy masculinity like that, I would argue Logan had a much healthier response than 19-year-old Justice in a car. Healthy masculinity is important because the toxic masculinity, the toxic aggression is going to be there. If we don't have healthy masculinity to rise up, I think that it's all that like, it's going to be so imbalanced. Like, how do we teach the Logans, the Echoes? Like,
but can I push back on that a little bit? Just a little push.
Okay. What do you disagree about with what I just said?
I don't know if that's really a man or a woman thing. I think it's a human thing.
What? I don't know.
I don't put that in like a masculinity category. I think in general, if my daughter did the same thing, if somebody was picking on my daughter, I would want my daughter also to find a way to stand up. I think masculinity immediately it's violent or like force, but you know, there's a difference between force and violence, right?
I do, but I'm going to say that if you like males respond differently. The Bachelor, when it's one man, 30 females, it gets more viewership because it's like subtle fighting, it's confessionals, it's talking in undertones. I read a sociological article on it. While if it's the Bachelorette, one woman, 30 men, it gets way low viewership because they're fighting physically. They're getting up in each other's face, and that's not as good for TV. So stereotypically, like, men do have more of that aggression. Women don't, for whatever evolutionarily
I think there's
wise.
a more simple answer to that.
How was that not simple?
I think The Bachelor, where there's one guy and there's 30 women who are like in bathing suits on every episode, I think there's more viewers because the guys are also watching.
No, that is not what the article said.
I think the article, that might be the more simple answer. So,
okay, I'm going to send you the article. We'll see on the breakdown. But it's basically,
I will comment on that article.
Men
I will rewrite the article
differently than women.
Oh yeah,
majoritively fight
100%. Because let's think evolutionary, right? Like if you look at a tribal situation, they have different tactics in order to be able to stand up for somebody else that may not have the physical to leverage, right? So it could be, obviously it's different. But my point was, standing up for somebody who can't stand up for themselves may not necessarily be masculine. I think that might be just leadership.
I would agree. That part I would agree on.
Yeah.
I would just say that a physical altercation where you have to stand up for yourself is less likely on the femininity side.
I also think that making a distinction between force and violence is important, because violence, this is not a virtue. Violence is not good. That's hurting somebody, right? But when I was a kid, the police department was called the force, right? Now it's called, I think, the department.
Yes.
Yeah. But when I was a kid, it was called like the force, to serve and protect, right? To serve and protect with force, right? So, when I was a kid, police officers, the reason why they had weapons was for force, not for violence. And now I think the perception is obviously changed. But back in the day, you could use force or power or leverage to stop something bad from happening, right? Violence is not force. Violence is punitive. It's revenge. It's you've done something to me, so I'm going to hurt you back, or I'm going to hurt you to get my way. So it's a total difference, right? So like jiu-jitsu is force. It's not violence. There's no striking. You're not kicking anybody in the face. You're not, there's no striking. It's just using leverage and force to put people in positions to submit them, right? An arm bar or a choke. But MMA is more violence, because there is actual like striking. You knock the person out in order to win, right? So there's a little, that's a kind of a different way to look at it. There's a really popular on ESPN right now called the power slap. Have you seen this?
No.
You haven't seen this?
I cannot even recall the last time I watched ESPN, even on social media.
Okay, so it's two people standing at an arm wrestling table with their hands behind their back. You've seen this.
No.
And they take turns slapping each other.
I would never watch that.
Never mind.
But what about it? What's the point?
I'm just saying it's not sport. It's just violence. It's not, you know what I mean? That's why nobody I know who's in combat sports likes that. They're like, that's just violence. But then you watch the tactics of fighting, boxing, you know what I mean? Or that's a sport. But the difference, anyways, my point was force and violence. Force is not violence. It's control. I'm going to stop this thing from happening. I'm going to keep violence from happening, versus violence is I'm going to get revenge. I'm going to make you do what I want. I'm going to make you pay for what you did. So I think that's an important distinction.
Now a quick pause to hear from my sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Efficient. Efficient offers fractional virtual assistants whose sole purpose is to help people who are making a difference. Are you bogged down in your email and still managing your own calendar? Delegating those tasks to a high-caliber career assistant can free you up to utilize your time towards the areas of your best and highest use, allowing you to focus on the areas you truly thrive in. Learn more at efficientaid.com. That's efficientaide.com.
I'm here to talk about Justice's book because we got through the entire episode and then we close and we hug and then he's like, You're really not going to talk about my book at all? I completely forgot. So we're putting it in here. It's called The Man Code, 10 Tenets of Biblical Manhood. And it's talking about the journey, like from boyhood to manhood. What does that look like in modern day? So you can get it on Amazon, and it's by Justice Coleman. His name on the book is not Uncle Justice Coleman, even though that's what I call him, but that's how you can look it up. And so I didn't want to leave the episode without mentioning it because I really value his take on manhood. And I think if you're wanting to explore more about what he talked about, you can look it up online. One more thing I want to let you know about is we are doing our first ever Haven Book Club. We're reading Radical Candor by Kim Scott, and the author herself has so graciously offered to come and do a live Q&A with us at the end of our discussion. So we're doing it Thursday, June 27th. If you want to join or hear more information about it, email hello@havenpod.com. We'd love to have you a part of the book club.
Okay, back to the episode.
So the police department, the best vision, like their original mission statement was we serve and protect. We're called the force. We use force to serve and protect. But now the perception is violence.
Right.
And so they're taking away guns and stuff like that because it was abused, right? So it's like, oh, we can't use these kind of weapons anymore because, right? So I think that's kind of a good kind of definition there. I want my son to be able to use force to stand up for somebody who can't stand up for themselves, right? Or my daughter, right? So yeah, there's a popular proverb which I would rather my son be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. So that's the idea of gentleness. Where does gentleness come from? Because you ask a guy, hey, is gentleness a masculine or feminine trait? And most guys will go, oh, that's feminine. But yet gentleness is a fruit of the Spirit in the Bible. Jesus is the best example of gentleness, but that's because he is so powerful that he can be gentle. So if you are gentle, but you're not powerful, you're not being gentle, you're just being weak.
Right.
You're not restraining any power. You're not using self-control. You're just being weak. So it's not gentleness. And that's where people don't understand meekness or this idea. Like, I love the story where you know the story where Peter jumps out and he cuts the guy's ear off.
Yes.
Right. And which is clearly he was trying to cut his head off because nobody aims for an ear. Right.
No,
he
missed.
Yeah, he missed. He cuts the guy's ear off. And then Jesus puts the ear back on, and Peter is upset because he's been betrayed. They're about to take him to be crucified. And Jesus pulls him aside and he goes, Peter, remember what he said?
No, I'm not a pastor.
Okay. He said this. He goes, I could call down like 1,000 angels and like roast all these fools right now if I wanted to. He goes, I could call down 6 legions of angels or something like that. Like, Peter, thanks for your help with your little sword, but your boy's being gentle with everybody right now. And it's not because I'm not strong. I'm actually the strongest in the universe, but I am surrendering that strength. I'm being gentle. I'm using force instead of violence. It's like the idea of gentleness as an attribute. I think if every man could catch that one idea that like nobody wants you not to be powerful. People just don't want you to dominate other people. This is the gift, is you can say, the more stronger I am, the more gentle I can be. I'd rather be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war, because life is tough, and my kids are going to have a whole different world that they're growing up into. My wife's way of nurturing them is a lot more eye to eye. You know, it's a lot more like front facing. The way I train my sons is I turn them around and I face them toward the world, and I look over their shoulder with them and I say, this world's going to be sending some stuff at you. Are you ready? Let me help you get ready for whatever the world, sends at you. I want you to be ready. You may not have to use these tools, but I want you to have these tools. I want you to be powerful and strong. And the things that you talked to me earlier about, what you tell your kids before they go to bed about being brave and courageous, I want that in them so they have it and they know who they are. Even if they don't have to use it, they still have it. Why are you smiling?
Because that's going to be the intro clip. Because I think it's awesome. I just love hearing it.
Okay.
I think that encompasses what I was kind of trying to excavate in this episode of like, what is it? Like, how from a man to a boy down to your sons, like, how are you saying this is what a healthy version of this looks like?
Act like a man can be an encouragement to it can be a reminder that, hey, your You're tougher than you think you are. You're stronger than you think you are. You know, you're in a journey. You know, we don't have a really good rite of passage ceremony in the West. Like we don't really have, you know, a big ceremony. I'm doing one with my son, like where we're going away on like a river rafting trip and like a whole thing for a week.
Can you tell us, like, what does that look like to raise sons right now? Like, what are you saying to them? And in addition to like be a big brother to your, you know, younger siblings and stand up for your friends, or even the practical of like, put your hands up like this when someone's coming and then potentially be ready to defend. Like, what is like the boots to the ground of that look like when you're teaching masculinity?
Well, I think earlier you said it changes, I think, with generations. That's why you like wanted to call this 2024, you know? But the principle, I think, is still the same, that men and women are 100% equal. But there is a uniqueness to a man that should be celebrated and a uniqueness to a woman that should be celebrated. And as generations and time goes by, there's different ways that men contribute and women can contribute. And it's not an issue of inequality. It's just an issue of like, how can I serve? You know? So like the way I serve Maria and my family is different than the way she serves me and the family. We are a team, you know, and I always go back to the biblical framework, right? Where the very first, you know, pretty much all your theology can come from just that garden story in Genesis. Adam wasn't even in charge of the garden until he had Eve. Like, remember, he was like naming animals and he was doing these other things, but God was preparing him. But it wasn't until they were together that he put them both in charge. So in a biblical worldview, man and woman team up to really make, you know, a great team to lead and to steward and to you know, and that's a picture of, I think, how the uniqueness of a man and the uniqueness of a woman really do fit together. And I know that's controversial, but I think it's a mom and dad together raising a son is a great team. You and Aaron do a great job. And I imagine you could speak to that. There's probably some things that like Aaron can kind of see and add for Echo, especially. And you can kind of see and add for, you know, Isley or vice versa, that there's just something really beautiful there in that design that, unfortunately, you know, there has been abuse in that. And there has been, you know, it hasn't always gone the right way, but we're imperfect people.
As you're saying that, I'm like, I do agree. We have the same faith. I also know that like a lot of my listeners don't. Like I look at the stats of my listeners, I look at who follow me, and they're not always people of faith. So what would you say to someone who's like, I don't agree with God. I don't agree with what that says.
Yeah, I mean, that's God's idea for you not to agree with him. Like that he gave all of us that ability to like consciously recognize the way he designed things and then us decide if we want to opt in. Like that's his gift to us, right? He doesn't push that on us. He goes, this is the way I created it. You're a created being. Here's the design. Do you want in on this vision, right? So I think that's awesome that we get to do that. You know, God could have made us, but he doesn't. And then, you know, if you're not a person of faith, you know, the language that's been traditionally used has been like traditional families, right? What is the language that people use are not of faith when they are describing kind of like a previous generation's nuclear family? Is that the language?
Yeah,
traditional?
it's the traditional nuclear family.
Yeah. So, you know, you can almost kind of put that up, and as long as you can see that from the right perspective, because we all have biases, you know, like even the way you were describing your grandmother, AKA my mother and my dad, I saw my dad as very masculine, but maybe you didn't see my dad as masculine because of the personality that is very timid.
I saw a ton of masculine traits. Like he taught me how to dirt bike. Like he was the guy who was front flips into the pool. He taught us, he would go crazy if he was driving the boat and you were on the inner tube on the back.
Just passive aggressive, just tubing.
Yeah, like just launching and hold on for your life. He had a ton of masculine traits, but I would say when it came to like the decisions of the home or the trajectory, or I didn't see a lot of like give and take in the decision making. I saw a lot of like grandmother being like, this is what's happening. And I didn't see equality there, but I would say your dad, my grandfather, super like masculine on those fronts of like interests and behavior. I think
personality.
Like I would say that like when I think of the decision maker though, it was like grandmother ran the show.
Your perspective of my mom might be a little bit more extreme because what you saw was that, and you got to understand my mom's background. She's comfortable with me sharing this because I've talked to her about sharing this before, but she did not necessarily have a father who took care of her. She does not used to a man who stepped up when she, or stood up for her when she couldn't stand up for herself. And so you grow up with an abusive father, alcoholic, all the gnarly stuff that she went through, and a previous marriage where she was really taken advantage of and all these things. You kind of get to the place where it's like your default is standing up for yourself. And so I think my dad also understood that. And in his maturity, he's like, I'm going to give kind of grace to some of this stuff. And he didn't have the kind of pride that often comes with like, how dare you do that in front of the whole family? Like, I think he knew behind closed doors how things really worked, and he didn't need to like do that. So I don't think you saw that, but
no, I was like 8. I was just like, whoa, don't.
My dad married my mom when she was 9 months pregnant. And that was like, my mom didn't want to get married, and there's a whole nother story for another podcast there. But my dad said, no, I'm going to take responsibility for this kid, and I'm going to take responsibility for this woman. I'm going to marry you. And like, he's always held that kind of line. Like, and I think that's what manhood is, saying, I'll be responsible for myself and I'll be responsible for other people, So, I've always seen my dad as a really great example of masculinity. But when we started this conversation, you might not have seen him that way. You might have seen more of my mom is more masculine.
Yeah. So when you ask of like my masculine traits, I'm seeing like the grandmother within me. And as like that of like, wow, it's the over responsive part, like.
And even when you say over responsive, like, don't you want to be in a relationship where there's room for that? Because I know that I can be overly responsive in my marriage, and Maria like gives me room for that sometimes. She's like, I don't think you really see this, but when you act like this is how you're behaving. You know what I mean? Or like, oh wow, you're right. And she's so great at that. And so even when I talk about my mom being, there is a time when you should be overly responsive, because there's got to be, you're kind of like evening the scales there, and there should be room for that.
I think in a safe, like, built on mutual respect and love, and if it's called out, yes, of course, like, we're human. I think there are different instances though where it's like it's just unhealth meeting unhealth consistently.
Yeah, you're totally right.
Yeah. When you take Logan on this whitewater rafting thing, what are you talking about with him?
I don't really know. It's like a whole thing that is done for me. It's just like a rite of passage, kind of like that somebody else went on. It's a week-long thing. It's like ropes courses. And
it's a place,
it's a whole place that does
to.
This. Yeah.
Because,
there should be some sort of ceremony, whether it's a bar mitzvah or it's a, quinceañera or whatever it is. There should be some sort of like, let's start treating you like a man. I always tell people all the time, if you treat a boy like a boy, he's going to stay a boy. But when you start treating him like a man, you're going to see, like this morning, okay, this is so funny. Fridays, I take the kids to school because it's my day off, right? And we're on the way to school, and the kids hate when I take them to school because they think they're going to be late every time.
Yeah, they tell me that. Yeah. They're like, oh, Fridays, our dads are late. Yeah, my dad's late.
They've never been late. Like, I don't even know. They
not according to them.
So I do donuts with dad every Friday. So I wake them up, donuts with dad. That's how I wake them up in the morning. It's my day off. And for a long time, I got out in the freezing cold. I stood in line. I got them the chocolate bar and the donut holes. You know what I mean? But now my son's 14. So I'm like, hey, are you going to get out and get the, and he goes, well, this is this morning. He goes, oh, my legs are sore from working out. He's in football. And I was like, oh, okay. So your legs are sore, so you don't want to get out? And he's like, okay. You're like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, it wasn't like a dig, but I was just thinking like he's like, oh wait, it's my honor. I get to serve, right? It's kind of like when mom pulls up with the groceries, and Maria's like mad at me. She's like, why didn't you get out and get the groceries for me out of the back of the car? And because I'm playing Fortnite, Maria. No, I'm just kidding. because, babe, I have a 14-year-old son. And how is he ever going to learn how to serve a wife if he doesn't learn how to serve his mom? So there is a part about practicing on your little sister and your mom on being a man, where it's like, no, mom, you don't need to carry that. I'll carry that for you. Some gals don't like that, but I would rather that be his default, to open the door, for a woman, or to pay for lunch, or to carry the groceries. I would rather that be his default as like, here's a way I can serve, rather than have a girl open the door for him or expect her to pay, or that kind of stuff. So Maria got that when I told her, I was like, listen, I can get the groceries, and I will, and I always have, but I want to make sure I'm not missing an opportunity for Logan to learn how to have to take responsibility. And just little things, like getting the donuts, you know what I mean? Like, you can get out in the cold and get the donuts for your brother and sister. And you know what, even he loves it. Like when I said, oh, your legs are sore, so you don't want to And I said something like, act like a man or something, like just joking. And he was like, he went light switch. He jumped out. What do you want? You want this? You want this? He brought me coffee. Here you go. He did the whole thing and loved it because he really jumps at the opportunity to be like, oh yeah, I'm in manhood year. This is my year. He's really we're reading books together. He's into it. Like, I think guys are into the call out to be a man. And I think sometimes maybe ladies on the surface miss that, but guys don't hear act like you're acting like a woman. They hear don't act like a boy. You're like, you're a man, act like it, you know? They hear the encouragement. It's the football team that smashes their helmets against each other. You know what I mean? They love it. There's one last story. So welcome to my podcast.
No, story? Keep going. Yeah, I actually do.
So I'm at a pool party the other day, and Logan is swimming. This is, and by the other day, this means 3 years ago. And this mom, she goes, I love the way you and your son engage. I love that you call him son, and I love that, you know, and because I don't call him bro or kid, you know, I call him son. And she had just gone through a divorce. She didn't have a dad in the home for her son, and there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes that I knew. And she asked me something, and she set it up. She goes, yeah, my son, he came home from football practice and he had rug burns on his hands and on his elbows. And that coach made him bear crawl in front of the whole team to the 50-yard line. And I'm thinking, that sounds like what a good coach does on a football team when somebody is late and he's teaching them that the whole team suffers if you don't carry your weight. That's what's going on in my mind. And I'm just like listening. And I'm like, okay. And she goes, so you know what I did? I went to the principal and I'm going to get that coach. I'm like, please tell me this is not a true story. She's like, what? Now remember, Haven, this is in a context where she had just said that she likes the way I raise my son. Sure. So it's like, not like I'm not being rude here, but I kind of explained that to her. I was like, but if he was late to practice, the coach was coaching him, you know? And I literally said that. I said, do you want your son to be a boy or do you want him to be a man? And she just, with sincerity, she's like, oh, I want him to be a man. I was like, well, those are the moments where you learn how to take responsibility for your place on the team. And she's like, oh, you know? So like, it's like, okay, I get it. So maybe her paradigm was that's unfair to do that. But the dad, the coach, the manhood is like, hey, you matter to this team. So know your role because you're important to this team. It's actually like when the kid got back from bear crawling or when all the team had to run the laps or whatever, everybody, it's a bonding thing. It's like, we're in this thing together, you know, that's where the, you know, so anyways.
I think that example is why also like me as a woman, I don't understand that, but I see the value in it. I see the importance in it. I think what you're saying of what you're teaching Logan and what that coach was teaching that son is like, it's a man to boy, man to man response of like intentionality and saying, this is what it looks like. It's coaching, it's directing, it's calling out in a way that that's why I want to echo around different types of men and strong like individuals like that of like, I would hope he would have a coach that would call that in him because it's not my POV to do that. It's not my take. That's not my parenting style.
Could I say it's a different way of doing it?
It's different.
Which is equally necessary?
I would say like when Aaron is with the kids, sometimes I'm always like, oh my gosh, it's so harsh, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. It's so much more direct that it doesn't mean it's not loving. It's so much more intense than me, but you want
your kids to win.
I want
my coach wants his team to win and all those players want to win. And when they see that kid have to do that or when they all do it together, that's because it all serves the greater purpose. We're going to war. There's going to be a battle. We all need to be ready.
See, even as me, I'm like, I want them to like teach them to be men of character. I'm like, I hope you win football. I mean, I'm competitive too, but I'm like, I hear that and I think, oh my gosh, like teach them how to be like men who do what they say, who show up on time, who care about the greater good and like the brothers around them. You can't learn
how to be a good winner, Haven, unless you win. Okay. Listen, you're the most competitive person in our family. All right.
It's
you're more
true.
competitive than me. All right.
Yes.
There's a reason why whenever there are teams at our board game night, me and you look at each other and we're like, a kingdom divided cannot stand. We are going to win, right?
And
we
Logan,
always team up.
Logan too, though. Logan will come in. He'll be like us three, right?
Yes. And you are notoriously, I don't know if I would say you know how to win well. Okay. You're used to winning. But how are Isley and Echo going to learn to be good winners if they don't win in life? So we're going to set them up to win, you know?
I think, okay.
Being a good loser, I mean, all you have to do is lose over and over again. But is that how you want your kids to learn? No.
I'm taking back the reins of this podcast. that is such a great point though about like board
Somebody
games.
give me a tote.
Be quiet. When we have the board games, you know what your family does that I love is the winner has to clean up. Where if you lost the board game, then you just get to walk away, but the winner cleans up. Where the thing is I think that's what I love about you and Maria's parenting. Everything you've shared of like, I want to bring Maria in to give her perspective too, but where it's intentional, where it's saying, hey, the winner cleans up the board game.
Yeah.
Or, hey, the big brother can go in and get the donuts. Like those kind of things. I think so much of it too is just calling out like where you want like them to grow in.
Well, it matters because remember the story I was telling about where somebody was making fun of Kendall for liking a boy.
Mm-hmm.
I literally said, she's going to be in high school and you're going to be a senior when she's in junior high or middle school or whatever. You're going to be at the same school together. And if if she gets a reputation, I told her, of being boy crazy, that's going to crush her. And you need to run interference as long as you can to protect your sister from that reputation. You know, that's the vision, is like, protect, run, like stand up for her. Don't let anybody talk about your sister.
To
like
me,
that.
as a woman hearing that, I'm like, oh man, that's amazing. Like, I don't know of any women listening to this that would be like, I would not want a healthy older brother or healthy dad doing that for me.
Yeah. What do you think about the dads
we crave that?
What do you think about the dads who like have the conversation who like scare the boyfriends when they come over? What do you think about all that? Like the stereotypical like dad's cleaning his gun on the coffee table when like, what do you think about all that?
I think the one you just described is stupid. Personally, I think it's so.
Okay, maybe. I'm
gonna answer. Let me answer, Uncle Justice. I think it is stupid to clean the gun. I think it's just this big machismo kind of thing. But I would hope that like my daughter is so secure where one, she knows what healthy love looks like. And if a boy wasn't doing that, she would have on her own accord. That's not comfortable. I would also hope that she feels safe enough where if my husband ever did have to step in, he would step in. He doesn't have to do this facade of I have a gun, I can beat you up, but that he's like, I'm so connected with my daughter that if you do anything outside of bounds, like she's not defenseless. She has me, she has her brother, she has, I mean, obviously the mother, but I think I would hope that that relationship is so secure that you wouldn't have to do this stupid facade, but that it would be so precedent of this is a connected family. Yeah. And if I degrade, devalue, de-honor this young woman, then it's not going to go unnoticed and it's not going to go uncalled out.
So let me push it a little bit in it. So you love when I do the little push.
I do. But you pushed on everything I've said.
That's what makes a good, entertaining podcast. And I agree with everything you just said. I think that with there are stories, and you can understand this, of maybe a woman who has been a victim and she's in a counseling session and the counselor is like, you need to forgive your dad. And she goes, why? My dad wasn't there. And then the counselor goes, exactly. And then she starts crying because she goes, innately, I feel like my dad should have protected me. I get emotional saying this, but like there is something about a little girl, I think, you know, I feel it as a dad that's just extra. I want to protect her, you know? I mean, the other day, my daughter was getting some little snot at school was saying something to her. And I was like, that happens again, I'm going to throw that kid on the roof. And she could not wait to use that. She's like, my dad is going to throw you on the roof. I actually went and faced off with the dad. No. Yeah, because he pushed her and everything, my daughter.
Wow.
And I wasn't aggressive, but I was just like, hey, this isn't going to work. That's what I told him. I said, our kids at the same school is not going to work. And that's all I said was like, you know, if you can't get your son to not put his hands on your daughter, right, we have to figure out something. That's all I said.
Tell me, why are you emotional saying that? Because I'm emotional hearing it.
Yes.
I think as a little girl, you want that so bad. I had instances where I was like, man, why didn't my dad stand up for me? Or Clancy, I remember when something happened with Clancy, you're like, I'm going to go to that person's place of work. I'm going to like hit them head on. And I remember being like, well, that's intense, but oh my gosh, that here's amazing. I was walking to the car. I remember and I think your mom or somebody stopped me. Hearing that, I felt like, yeah, please.
Yeah. And even the story where I was like going to the car to go drive to the work to go to, like, that's not the right way of handling it, but there's something about it should be handled somehow. Maybe not violence, but but force. Well, yeah. I mean, how many times is someone going to put their hands on my daughter before it does get violence?
Okay.
Right. I mean, let's be honest. Like we don't like war, but war stops worse things from happening sometimes, you know? So it's not a right or wrong. It's life. Like I mean, if somebody messes with Isley or Echo, you have a limit, Haven. You're a mama bear, and you can call it masculine energy, but you're a mama bear, you know? And that's because God has put you in their life to protect them and train them. I tell my son all the time, I said, my job is to protect you until you can protect yourself. I tell him, I said, you got to protect your heart. Don't watch that on TV. Don't be a part of that. You know, and we can get into this conversation another time, but I'm like, my job is to protect you. You can't have a cell phone yet, son. It's not giving you access to the world. It's giving the world access to you. And I'm going to protect you from that as long as I can. Okay, you're 13 for the next year. Show me how you handle this Wi-Fi only phone. Show me that I can trust you. Show me that you can protect yourself. When you're 14, I'll give you a phone number. He's the last one of his friends to get his phone number, but I needed to know he could protect himself enough to where I could kind of back off a little bit, because if something happens to his heart, I'm going to feel responsible while he's a minor and he's in my care, you know, he's living in my house, you know, I can see my niece getting a little bit emotional.
I think healthy masculinity is really needed. I think there's something about the protection, and I hate the word just dominance, but I mean of that sense of feeling like there's someone who will stand up. There's someone who will fight. And I just really value that. And I'm so glad that, I'm just so glad you do that for Kenny. And it kind of makes me sad I didn't have that for myself. And it makes me sad for women listening who didn't have that for themselves, because I think that's probably more normal. And so I feel emotional because I can't describe what it is, and this topic is already concerning to me because I don't want anyone to feel ostracized, but all I can do is speak for myself and say, I want men like that in the world. I want men like that who fight for injustice and nurture and protect their families and stand up for what's wrong and protect. And so I think even hearing that feels a little bit of a relief, because I think we hear so many unhealthy and intense examples, and maybe you even shared your own from when you were 19, but you've matured into it. So I want a mature, healthy masculinity. I see it in my husband. And I know my daughter's not going to sit on a couch and have these feelings. I'm so happy that she's not going to have to. And I celebrate that in her. And I think I still grieve for the little girl in me that would have loved to have had that. So that's why I feel emotional. Yeah. I'm just really glad my daughter isn't going to sit on a couch and feel the same way. So I don't know where to take it from here. You now have abdicated hosting, even though you were the whole episode. Now you're putting it back on my camp. Thanks a lot for that. But I actually think a vulnerability moment for an ending is actually pretty cool. I never really do that. I'd always kind of close it out with a parting thought. I think I'm just going to intentionally end it on this one, because for me, I would like to kind of sit in this moment a little longer. I don't know if you have as a listener, what it's bringing up in you, if anything, but I'm grateful for you, Justice, for coming and talking about this. As much as I was joking, I really liked the banter back and forth. I liked the aggression coming at me of, taking over the reins. But the last thing I'm going to say is I think healthy masculinity is important, and I'm excited for a different generation to rise up and have pictures and models of what that can look like. And so I'm appreciative for you. I'm appreciative for the Aarons of the world and the other men that I know. That's another thing, is I could name 50 men that I think are healthy versions of masculinity. And I think that is an absolute gift. I think that is so, so cool. I see my friends who are fathers. I see people I've worked with before, and I know it's out there. I just hope it's getting more visible. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.